Demon Kissed, Chapter 24. Oh, will you now? I thought you didn't want to hurt me, Merrick. Delia purred right in my ear, her accent thick enough to cut with a dagger, and I stilled as I felt her fangs scrape my neck a second later. Her arms snaked around my shoulders, and I saw that her fingers now sported clawed tips, just before she began to slowly shred my tunic with them. Delia, my love, what are you doing? I asked, and groaned when her claws gently pricked my skin. She stilled behind me, and her fingers tensed on my stomach. Do you mean that, Merrick? Or is that just an endearment to you, as it can be with so many people? She asked softly, and pulled away from me. I turned to look at her, and noted her body posture carefully. She was sitting stiffly with her back to the headboard, and had her knees drawn up to her chest, defensive, wary, and ready to hide from the answer to her questions if necessary. You have said it twice now, you know, she said, her tone musing and her eyes filled with caution. Yes, I know I have said it twice, and I meant it both times. Lay, I want you. I need you, I said, then paused to laugh at myself and continued. Hells, woman, I love you, and I have loved you for 9 years, but I will not make love to you tonight. Why? She asked, and I thought she meant why wouldn't I make love to her tonight, until she added, Why do you love me? Why do any of you love me? I'm a monster. Why would any of you love me? A loud crash startled me awake, and I bolted up into a crouch on the bed, then put a hand to my head, closing my eyes as the room seemed to spin around me. A whispered curse in the hallway drew my attention to the door, and shaking off the dizziness, I leapt off of the bed, then strode to the door and yanked it open to demand what was going on, then froze with my mouth open and blinked. There in the hall, just outside my bedroom door, crouched and muttering over a broken vase, was the last person I had been expecting to see in Dominic's home for at least another week, if not longer. What was she doing here? She was supposed to still be resting and healing at Alistair's, I thought, frowning. What are you doing here, Eerie? I asked, and she squeaked, spinning in place to face me. Oh, good morning, Merrick, she said, blushing as she stared up at me with wide eyes, and I remembered too late that I wasn't wearing a single stitch of clothing at the moment. I held up one finger and stepped back into my room, then closed the door again. Glancing around the Spartan room, I realized that none of my things had been brought with me, and cursed softly. Even the clothes I had been wearing the day I was brought here were absent. My hand moved to my chest, just below my neck, as a thought occurred to me, and I let out a little sigh of relief when my fingers touched my dark green pendant. Thank the gods they hadn't taken that, otherwise I would have been running around naked until someone brought me clothes or stuck in beast form. There was always the option of using a glamour, but using a glamour took power and concentration, normally not an issue, as I had both in abundance. However, I was still pretty weak from my bout of hawthorn poisoning, and didn't want to risk the glamour failing on me when I was out in public. The whole Emperor's New Clothes thing just did not appeal to me at the moment. Running around as a huge gold lion for a few hours or days held very little appeal as well, and I'd much rather just shift once between forms and come out of the change dressed. I tapped the warm, dark green stone twice and shifted. A knock sounded on the door just as the shift to beast form finished, and I gave a soft coughing roar in response. Okay then, I guess I'll just stand here and wait. Aaron's voice squeaked from the other side of the door, and I shook my maned head. I quickly reversed the shift back to my normal form, ignoring the pain, then looked down to make sure that I was now dressed and opened the door again to look at her, consideringly. She was leaning against the wall across from my door and looked a bit nervous as she looked back at me. Good morn, Aaron. Care to tell me why you're here? I said, and she gave me a small smile. I started training with Dominic yesterday, and he told me that I'd have to stay here for the duration, because I apparently need more than just training in hand-to-hand, she said, and grimaced before adding, "He wants me to learn how to dance, mentioned there being a correlation between that and ease of movement when in battle." She shrugged and looked away for a moment, then muttered, "I really don't get it, but he showed me what he meant by sparring with Cade Blackbriar, and I have to say, the way they moved scared the crap out of me." I chuckled a bit at that, and she glared at me. "I'm not laughing at you, love. Believe me, I'm not. I just remembered that neither of them know the first thing about teaching someone how to dance well, and was trying to imagine them attempting to teach you how to dance at all," I said, holding up my hands, and she sighed. "They both said that either you or someone named Lorenzo would have to teach me now. But I don't understand why or how learning to dance, gracefully, I might add, will help me fight better," she said, her voice rife with confused frustration. "It's been a long time since I've taught anyone how to dance, let alone sparred with anyone, but I think I can manage both tasks, and if I run into a problem, I can always call Renzo in to help us out," I said, and shrugged, adding, "As for how dance can improve your fighting capability, you saw them fight, Erie. You saw how fluidly and how fast they moved." "Yeah, I did, but how will learning to dance well make me able to move like that?" she said, and shook her head. "They were most likely not moving as fast as they could have, so that you'd be able to see them moving, and you said watching them scared you," I said, and she nodded. Nodding back, I continued, "Now imagine them sparring at their full speed. Then imagine having to fight them both, either one-on-one or at the same time. Doesn't matter, really. But imagine doing that while at your current level of fighting ability." Her face drained of all color, her eyes widened, and she swayed on her feet for a moment after I stopped speaking. "There ain't no fucking way in hell I'd be able to defend myself from them, let alone fight back," she barked, and I nodded. "At your current level of ability, you wouldn't even stand a chance against your younger sons, let alone myself or Dom. Learning to dance well will help with your ability to evade and counterattack quickly. It will also aid in your ability to gather information," I said, and stepped all the way out of my room and shut the door behind me. "I still don't get it, but fine, whatever. I'm still only human, Merrick. And I don't understand how learning to ballroom dance will change the survivability of something like that," she said. "Where did you train yesterday?" I asked, shaking my head. I had the feeling that teaching her to dance would be a lot harder than it sounded, and couldn't wait to meet the challenge. "Dom called it the second basement, but it actually looks more like a gym, and it's huge," she said, and pushed away from the wall, then asked, "Want me to show you where it is?" "If you would, please. If I remember correctly, there should be a ballroom in the house somewhere that we can use for your dance lessons," I said, waving her down the hall ahead of me, and fell into step behind her when she started walking. "I wouldn't know about that. I've only seen the ground floor, the first 2 basements, and my room up here on the 3rd floor so far. My door's just down the hall from yours, by the way," she said, and I grunted, watching how she moved as she walked ahead of me. Her steps were quick but careful, and she had a slight limp that was barely noticeable, unless you were looking for it, as I was, of course, and I shook my head a bit. There was no way that she was recovered enough to begin training with any of us at the moment, and I wondered how she'd convince Dom that she was. "That's fine. I'll ask Dominic about it later. For now, though, I can work with you on your hand-to-hand and get in some sparring with one of the girls while I'm at it," I said, and she stopped at the top of the stairs to turn and look at me. "Why does everyone keep harping on my hand-to-hand? I don't do in-close bare-handed fighting, Merrick, and I know I'm not very good at it. "That's why I have guns and my crossbow," she said pointedly. "Spar with me for a bit, then watch me when I spar with one of the girls, and you'll see why we keep harping on it," I told her, then pointed down the stairs and followed her down them. Once we reached the ground floor, she turned down a hallway and led me to the kitchen. From there she led me to a door in the far wall and down another flight of stairs to the basement. She paused for a moment at the foot of the stairs, and I waited patiently for her to move again. After a few minutes she began moving again, and I stepped off the stairs to follow her through the dimly lit, shelf-filled room. "It's right through here, and you might want to watch your step. The stairs are pretty steep," Erin said, pulling open a door and stepping through it. I followed her down the stairs slowly and sniffed the air curiously when I detected an odd smell halfway down. The scent was similar to turpentine mixed with oil paint, but was slightly different, and it took me a moment to place it because it was nearly overwhelmed by Erin's delicate scent. "Is Dominic's studio down here somewhere?" I asked abruptly, and she stumbled on a bit on the bottom step. Reaching out quickly, I caught her arm and steadied her for a moment. Yeah, it's down one more flight of stairs behind that door over there," she said, and pointed to the other end of the long, brightly lit underground room. I released her arm when we were both standing on the floor and looked around. I could smell that the paint on the walls was still relatively fresh, and I could tell that the rubber mats on the floor were new just by glancing at them, and noted that the lights in the ceiling appeared to have been installed 2 or 3 days ago, as they were free of cobwebs and dust. The room itself was both long and broad, but not overly large, as Erin had led me to believe. Over in a corner stood a bench press weight machine with 2 heavy sandbags standing beside it. A speed bag was positioned on the wall near the sandbags, and there was a long row of metal pipe suspended from the ceiling about 3 feet from the back wall for doing pull-ups. Along the opposite wall was a group of 6 wooden hand-to-hand training dummies, and all of them were so new I could still smell the sawdust on them. "Not too bad," I murmured, walking over to the weight machine and looking at the weights attached to the bar over the bench. Put together, there was 500 pounds of weights on the bar, and the scent on the machine was Cade's, meaning that he had been the last one to use it. I removed 2 of the 50-pound weights, bringing the overall weight down to 400, and lifted it over my head with one hand, then brought my arm back down even with my chest and began doing arm curls with it. "I've not seen a man do something like that, since Ailea uprooted a redwood and used it to beat a dragon to death," a light, slightly Russian female voice said from over by the stairs, and I glanced in that direction, noting as I did that Erin was staring at me with her mouth open and her eyes wide in either shock or amazement. It was hard to tell which with just a glance. "Anya, my lovely, lovely tigress, how are you?" I said, and switched the barbell to my other hand. She prowled farther into the room and stopped beside Erin. "I am very well, Merrick. How about you? I know you were down sick for several days. Are you sure you should be lifting that much yet?" she said, and snapped her fingers in Erin's face, startling her so bad that she fell backwards onto her ass on the floor. "It's only 400 pounds, Anya, and I wouldn't be lifting it if I wasn't sure I could handle it," I said after clearing my throat of a laugh, and put the bar back in place gently. The whole truth on the matter of the weights was that I was still recovering, and I probably shouldn't have lifted them at all, let alone one-handed, but once I saw the machine, I just couldn't resist showing off a bit for Erin. I strolled over to where Erin was sitting on the floor and offered her my hand to help her up. She hesitated for a second, then took it, and I pulled her to her feet. I released her hand once she was steady and turned to Anya. Leaning down, I kissed her cheek, and she reached up and gave me a tight hug. "I am happy you are still with us, Merrick," And I'm very happy that you're here instead of at Alistair's or that infernal hunter base," she said, and released me from her embrace. "I'm happy that you're happy, Anya. Truly," I said, and she gave me a strange look. "We've all missed you around here. Even Nick missed you, and Cade too, believe it or not," she said, looking me over carefully and shaking her head before adding, "I wondered sometimes why Ailea let you stay with us whenever he had to be away from home for too long. But now I don't question the why behind everything that he did. I'm just grateful he did it." "I don't quite follow you, mate sister," I said jokingly, and she grinned. "I love you, mate brother. We all do, and we are all very glad to have you home," she said, throwing herself into my arms again, and wrapping hers around my waist in a very tight hug. I hugged her back and kissed the top of her head. Over her head I could see Erin standing a few feet away with her hand pressed against her head and her eyes squeezed shut. "Erin?" I called questioningly, releasing Anya, and took a step towards her. "No!" she screamed, putting her other hand to her head and falling to her knees. The scream was filled with agony and was followed by a heartbreaking sob as she curled forward into herself. "Erin!" I shouted as alarm shot through me and bolted forward. I reached her side in just 2 strides, knelt beside her, and gathered her into my arms. "No, no, 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 no," she whimpered and curled into my chest. "Eerie, love, talk to me. What is wrong? Or rather, what happened, baby?" I asked, holding her tightly. I looked across her head, and Anya's alarmed gaze met mine. "What should we do for her, Merrick?" she asked. "Get to Dom, Anya, and see if he's in the same condition. I think this may have something to do with the reawakened link between them," I told her, and glanced down at Erin. She was shaking, pain radiating from her in sweeping waves, and the front of my t-shirt was becoming damp with her tears. I looked back up and saw that Anya had gone. Assuming that she would also gather the others without being asked, and take care of what I had told her to do, I focused entirely on the small, crying woman in my arms. "Eerie, come on. Please, tell me what's wrong, baby," I whispered into her hair, sitting on the floor and pulling her into my lap. Alistair," she choked out and began sobbing in earnest. Good gods, what on earth was going on, I wondered. Pulling her in tighter to my chest and rocking slightly from side to side. "Oh my God, Alistair, no, no!" she screamed wretchedly and broke down into sobs again. "What the hells?" thundered through the room as the door Erin had said led to Dom's studio crashed open and Dominic came into the room like a wrathful dark god of vengeance. "How the hells would I know? I do not have a God's-be-damned link to her mind," I snapped at him, and continued trying to get her to tell me what had happened. "Baby, what happened to Alistair?" Her gut-wrenching sobs were slowly tearing my heart out, and my mind flashed back to another woman's sobs of grief and screams of pain for a few moments. "Merrick, I don't know where... Never mind. How is she? Has she said what's happened?" Anya's voice said, bringing me back to the present, and I looked up at her. "No, not yet. Did you gather the others while you were looking for his sorry hide?" I asked, gesturing at Dom with my chin, and she nodded. "Erin, what about Alistair? You've shut me out, my lady, and I can't help you if I don't know the problem," Dom said calmly, crouching in front of me, and went to place his left hand on her shoulder. Erin released one hand from the death grip she had on my shirt, then reached out for him blindly, and he took her outstretched hand. Burning pain banded my throat as soon as their hands touched, and I hissed, gritting my teeth. Dom hissed as well, and I glanced at him. His free hand was clamped to his biceps, and I could tell his teeth were gritted like mine by the way his jaw worked. Anya moaned softly, and a groan of pain came from the doorway of the stairs leading to the first basement. Dom and I both looked that way, as both sounds had come from the same direction, and I saw Anya holding her right wrist. Over at the foot of the stairs, Cade was bent double and had one hand pressed to his lower abdomen on top of his belt. His other hand was gripping the doorway in a white-knuckled hold. "Shit!" Dom hissed, and my gaze jumped back to him. His eyes had a distant look to them, and when he focused them on me a second later, I swallowed hard. His emerald green eyes were cold, hard, and were starting to glow faintly gold with power. What worried me, though, was the faint glow of red rage that was swirling through the gold. "What is it, Dom? Do you know what's happened now?" I asked softly, and he nodded tightly. "Alistair's been attacked and needs help now," he said in a tone of absolute death that I hadn't heard from him in more centuries than I cared to remember, and I stared at him. He released Aaron's hand abruptly and quickly stood in one fluid predatory move to his full height of 6 feet and 8 inches. Cradling Aaron in my arms, I stood as well and held her to my chest tightly as I stared at Dominic. By the sight of his power around him in a glowing cape, I could tell that he was pissed, but he had it held tightly in check behind his shields, and it never touched my own as he stood looking intently at Aaron's pale face. The look in his eyes was stunning to behold, for mixed with the now coldly burning rage was agonized pain, and I could tell that whoever had dared to attack Alistair, and had dared to harm her in the process, was a very, very dead individual, or group of individuals, when Dom tracked them down and got his hands on them. He hadn't earned the nickname Mad Dog for nothing, and I'd seen him in battle often enough, and heard enough stories, to know that when he found them there wouldn't be enough left of them to bother burying. A memory from long ago came to me at that moment, and I suddenly remembered Leigh saying once that when Dom fought to protect himself, he often played with his prey for hours before finishing them off for good. She'd laughed softly and smiled a bit before adding, "But if that man is fighting to protect someone else or to deal justice to an enemy, he doesn't know the meaning of the word mercy, nor will he hold back his power. Dominic is the best hunter we have because he doesn't understand backing down when a job needs done. He sure as all the hells wouldn't give up on a hunt for justice in order to right a wrong done to his family, and I have never had to worry about him when he's out there alone without me to watch his back." At the time I hadn't understood what she meant, but now I finally understood, and I looked past him at Cade for a second. I nodded when Dom looked into my eyes briefly, with a silent question in his before returning his gaze to Aaron's face, and I saw his eyes flash to complete red for a second, then back to glowing green gold. "I will look after her care, Dom. I give you my word, and if you need me to assist you with healing Alistair, just call out on the guild link and I will come," I said, and amusement briefly warmed his gaze before a frozen expression came over his face and his eyes lost any trace of emotion. I could see his inner jaguar pacing behind his power, and knew full well that he had just let me see the killer that lived within his soul. Delia had done the same once, and remembering what I had done then, I smiled and said, "God's gift you wings this day, dear friend. Return victorious and safe." "What do you mean Alistair's been attacked? Who the fuck would have the balls to go after him?" Cade's voice wheezed in demand from the doorway, and I saw a blood-chilling smile shape Dom's mouth. "A pack of humans under the control of Feaster," he said, and turned away from me to face him. Cade must have seen something in his face that I hadn't, because his face bleached of color and he darted toward Dom, who turned into mist and rushed up the stairs past him. Swearing, Cade turned and lunged up the stairs after him, leaving Anya and myself standing in the training room looking after them both. Erin's sobs had finally tapered off to whimpers, and she had curled farther into my chest, her fingers clenched in the material of my now tear-soaked shirt. Her slender body was shaking slightly, and her skin felt cold to the touch when I gently brushed her hair away from her face. Concerned, I held her full weight in my left arm, and tipped her head back with my right hand. Staring into her eyes, I noted that her pupils were dilated to 4 times normal and were dazed. She was going into shock, and I needed to find the cause before she became catatonic. I also would need to get her to a bed quickly so that I could treat her without putting more strain on her body by having to hold her like this. Pressing her face into my neck, I put my right arm back under her legs and ran a magic internal quick check of her body and couldn't detect the cause. Alarm bells started ringing in the back of my mind, and I turned to look at Anya. "Anya, where is her room?" I asked, and she looked at me blankly, so I added, "I need to put her in a bed, Anya, and I do not know where her room is. Where is her room?" She stared at me for a second more and then shook her head. I don't know. Dom carried her up to the 3rd floor, but I don't know which room he put her to bed in last night," she said, and I remembered Aaron saying that her room was just down the hall from mine on the 3rd floor. But she hadn't said in which direction down the hall it was from mine, and I shook my head as I looked down at her in my arms. She was in no state at the moment to tell me where it was if I asked her right now, and I really did need to get her in a bed soon. I couldn't keep holding her like this for much longer. My arms were beginning to tire, and her whimpers had faded into hiccuping breaths that fell on my neck in a stuttering rhythm. Deciding to just put her in my room, I headed for the stairs at a fast pace and climbed the steps 3 at a time. When her hands fell away from my shirt and her head dropped back to rest on my left bicep, I cursed the fact that I was still very weakened from the poisoning I had suffered a few days ago. I rushed through the 1st basement, then up the stairs to the kitchen, and then through the hall and up 2 more flights of stairs to the 3rd floor. I muttered a spell of opening as I reached my door, ran into the room, and laid her down on the bed gently. "Aaron?" I said, kneeling beside the bed and putting 2 fingers to the vein in her neck to check her pulse. It was steady and very slow. Too slow, way too slow, I thought in renewed alarm when her pulse stuttered under my fingers, and I pressed my other hand to her chest over her heart. Her breathing faltered, rattling in her chest, and under my hand her heart beat once, twice, then stopped beating altogether, and I swore violently. "Come on, love, don't do this. Don't die on me," I said, and started doing CPR to restart her heart. 1, 2, 3, breath, wait, check for a pulse, and repeat. I repeated the procedure 4 more times, and she finally gasped for breath and coughed as her heart began beating again. Giving a silent prayer of thanks to whichever gods would hear it, I laid my head on my hands for a moment and just breathed in and out slowly. Finally letting myself feel the panic of the last few minutes and then letting it drift away. This had to be the 12th time in 11 years that I'd had to do that, and it still scared the hell out of me. Sometimes when she had suffered an emotional or mental shock, her heart would just stop for no reason, and what made it truly terrifying was that it could happen any time after whatever incident had caused the shock. She groaned, and I lifted my head to look at her face as her eyelids fluttered open. "Reich? What?" She coughed and tried weakly to sit up. "Shh. Either myself or someone else will tell you what happened later. Just lie there, love, recover your strength, and breathe. Gods, please, just keep breathing for me, baby," I said hoarsely, and cupped her cheek gently in one hand. She nodded slightly, and her eyes drifted shut again. Closing my eyes, I bowed my head and continued to calm myself as I listened to her breathing. "You're in love with her, aren't you, Marek?" Rosalind's voice said softly from the doorway, startling me, and I jumped to my feet. Turning to face her, I opened my mouth to deny it, closed it again, opened it, closed it, and finally looked away from her, shrugging. What could I say? She was right, I realized. I didn't know when it had happened in the last 11 years, hadn't even realized it had happened until just now when Roz said something about it. And I didn't want to think of the repercussions my being in love with Aaron could cause right now. Hell, I didn't even want to think about the fact that I was in love with her. When Alistair figures out that I'm in love with his little human, he is going to kick my ass to the 9 hells and back. Then he'll kill me, I thought, and winced. That was, if Dom had gotten to the Frenchman in time so that he'd be alive to kick my ass.